A woman walks into the courtroom where she was once handcuffed and humiliated, for no other reason than speaking the truth. But this time, she isn't here to plead. She's here to expose three men who once held absolute power: a judge, a billionaire, and a city councilman. How does someone go from being discredited to forcing an entire system to kneel before the truth? And what was inside that binder that made the entire room fall silent? This isn't a story of revenge. It's a story of justice, carried not by anger, but by calm, by evidence, and by a belief that truth, once revealed, speaks for itself. It all begins in the very room where every mistake was once made legal. She walked through the metal detector like any other visitor. No fanfare, no cameras, just the soft echo of her heels against the marble floor of courtroom 9B. Jasmine Crockett had been here before, but the last time, her wrists were in cuffs, and her name was whispered like a warning. Back then, she was the one on trial, falsely accused, stripped of dignity, spoken over by men in robes who had already decided who she was. Today, the setup looked the same. The same wood-paneled walls, the same cold air humming from the vents. But something had shifted. Jasmine wasn't standing at the defense table anymore. She was standing at the center. No lawyer beside her, no bailiff waiting to escort her out. Just her and a thick binder of truths no one in that room was ready to face. It started with silence. The kind that fills a space not out of respect, but out of anticipation. Carver, the judge who once signed off on her arrest without blinking, sat above her again. His face unreadable, hands folded, still trying to look like the law. But Jasmine wasn't there to play roles. She wasn't asking for justice. She was bringing it. Behind her sat the public, the ones who remembered the headlines, the edited footage, the assumptions. Some leaned in, unsure what this would be. Others sat back, expecting drama. But Jasmine gave them none. No raised voice. No righteous speech. Only her presence. And in that presence was every sleepless night, every lie she had to swallow, every time she was told to let it go. She didn't let it go. She studied it, followed it, traced every wire, every signature, every favor passed under the table. And now she was here to return it. All of it, right where it began. To the average viewer, this looked like a woman delivering a report, but to the people who have lived long enough to know what power does behind closed doors, this moment felt different. They saw in Jasmine something they recognized: a quiet endurance, a refusal to forget. For those who had once been told to move on, who had their own moments of being silenced or mislabeled, Jasmine was not just speaking. She was standing for all of them. And as she reached for the binder and opened to the first page, no one in that room could have imagined that this single act, the simple turn of a page, would begin to unravel the lives of three of the city's most powerful men. But this time, the woman they once dismissed held the fate of that entire courtroom in her hands. Jasmine didn't begin with accusations. She began with numbers. Clean, quiet, undeniable. She read from a document stamped with a federal seal, certified transaction records from Midland First Bank, tied to a network of nonprofits supposedly run by philanthropist Thomas Eldridge. Each page showed donations made in neat round figures, 100,000 here, 500,000 there. But these weren't donations, they were exits. Money funneled through fake charities, stripped of oversight and rerouted into holding accounts under shell corporations. Jasmine had traced every transfer. Not just the amounts, but the timing, the names, the signatures. And the pattern was clear. Every time a zoning deal went through without review, another donation landed in Eldridge's nonprofit. Money went in dirty. It came out clean. She read it plainly. No emphasis. No theatrics. She didn't need to perform. The facts did the talking. The courtroom leaned in, not because of how she spoke, but because what she was saying could no longer be ignored. Even Carver blinked. His jaw tightened for just a moment when she cited an account that had once belonged to his own campaign treasurer. She noticed. So did the agents seated by the back wall, hands folded, still but alert. Some in the audience nodded slowly, not because they were surprised, but because they weren't. They had seen this before. Men who spoke of justice by day and moved money at night. People who shook hands with pastors only to buy silence from accountants. It was never about whether the system was rigged. It was about proving it, and Jasmine just had. Seated near the rear, an older man in a tan windbreaker leaned forward, whispering to the woman beside him. That man, Ray Simmons, had spent 3 decades in law enforcement. He'd seen cases like this fall apart because someone higher up pulled the plug. But now, as he watched Jasmine name names and quote from documents under oath, something settled in his chest. A quiet sense that, for once, the plug might not hold. What Jasmine revealed in those first 10 minutes wasn't the full picture, but it was the first crack in a wall that had stood for too long. She let the silence linger, then turned to the next section of her binder, a new tab marked Development Contracts, the kind that don't show up in public hearings, but always seem to benefit the same names. And as she flipped the page, the air in the courtroom shifted. Like the weight of the truth was finally beginning to press down on the people who built their power on no one ever daring to look this close. Jasmine turned the page, revealing a map of the city. Color-coded and time-stamped, it showed zoning changes over the last 6 years. One district in particular stood out: residential lots rezoned into commercial zones at record speed. Every adjustment approved without public comment. Every permit signed off within days. And every time, the beneficiary was the same: a developer known for his ties to Thomas Eldridge and generous contributions to the campaigns of Judge Carver and Councilman Daniel Hayes. She didn't have to say it with outrage. The pattern itself was damning. It was a cycle: money into campaigns, favors back out in land deals. And behind the technical language of zoning variants and fast-track approval lay a simple truth. Communities were being erased to make room for profit. Families displaced, local businesses bulldozed, streets renamed. Jasmine showed contracts that reused the same notary signature, the same legal phrasing, as if a single blueprint was being copy-pasted across the city. For those watching, especially the older ones who had lived through decades of redevelopment, the betrayal cut deep. They remembered when their neighborhoods had character, barbershops that knew their name, churches that stood for something, parks that actually stayed parks. Now, those spaces had turned into glass towers with names like Legacy Point or the Hayes District. Jasmine didn't need to explain the irony. The audience already knew. In the third row, Willie Thompson, retired mechanic, 74 years old, gripped his cane a little tighter. 5 years ago, he had to leave the home he built by hand because of a zoning shift he didn't understand until it was too late. They told him it was legal. Just policy, just change. But today, watching Jasmine connect those decisions to campaign checks and falsified environmental reports, Willie felt something shift. This wasn't just business. It was theft with paperwork. Jasmine let the documents speak for themselves. Emails between developers and city officials, timestamps that matched donation deposits, a permit approval that arrived before the application was even filed. It was a story told in dates, initials, and overlapping favors. And with each name that returned, Eldridge, Hayes, Carver, the circle drew tighter. She paused, let the map on the screen hang in silence. Then she looked up and said what needed to be said. This isn't development. This is displacement, masked as progress. And as she closed the folder and reached for the next, the room seemed smaller. Not physically, but morally, as if the walls had moved in just a little, pressing against those who once felt untouchable. Jasmine didn't rush. She reached into her bag and carefully pulled out a small black recorder, the kind that fits in a coat pocket or the lining of a purse. She placed it on the podium like it was fragile, not because it might break, but because what it held could break careers, reputations, even the illusion of legitimacy in that room. She pressed play. What came next wasn't a monologue. It wasn't even a confession. It was a conversation. Low, quiet, but clear. 2 voices, one belonging to Thomas Eldridge, the other, unmistakably, to Judge Raymond Carver. They weren't discussing legal theory. They were coordinating, casually, like men ordering lunch. Eldridge named a project. Carver asked how soon the permits were needed. Eldridge said he'd move money tonight. Carver chuckled. Then we're ahead of schedule. That line hung in the air like a rusted bell. Jasmine let it ring. The courtroom stayed silent, not out of disbelief, but out of recognition. This wasn't a shocking crime. It was a familiar one. It just wasn't supposed to have a recording. Jasmine tapped the screen behind her. A transcript appeared in real time, synced to the audio. Names, dates, precise wording, each line tightening the noose. The recording had been authenticated by 3 separate forensic analysts. No edits, no splices. Just one evening, one conversation, captured in full. Judge Carver didn't flinch at first, but as his own voice played back to him, his breathing changed. Shallow, controlled. A man who realized he was now listening to the sound of his own undoing. For the people in that room who had once been dismissed, misjudged, or ignored in that very courtroom, the moment felt like justice reaching back through time. Charlene Givens, sitting near the aisle, remembered her own hearing 6 years ago, how Carver never looked up while denying her custody rights. She had nothing to offer him. No donations, no leverage, just the truth, and it wasn't enough. But now, watching him hear his own words used against him, she whispered, "Now you know how that feels." Jasmine didn't add commentary. She didn't need to. She let the final seconds of the tape play out. Then silence, then a click. She picked up the recorder, turned it off, and placed it back into her bag. One sentence followed. Not angry, just certain. This conversation took place 6 months before the rezoning approval for Bellwood Heights. That permit was issued in 2 days. She didn't need to prove motive. She didn't need to dramatize the betrayal. She had just shown them what it sounds like when corruption forgets it's being watched. As she closed her notes and looked at the bench, Judge Carver didn't meet her eyes. The mask was beginning to slip. The robe no longer looked clean, and Jasmine, without raising her voice, had just dismantled the myth of authority with a single recording. The moment Judge Carver stood up, the room didn't move. No murmurs, no shifting. Just the sound of his chair scraping back, slow and deliberate. He adjusted his robe as if clinging to the last thread of control, but nothing he did could stitch his authority back together. His mouth open like he might issue a warning, maybe a legal technicality, maybe a personal threat. But no sound came out. Not with federal agents standing just behind the gallery rail. Not with Jasmine's documentation already logged in a sealed motion the night before. She wasn't just presenting evidence, she had filed charges. Jasmine turned slightly toward the agents, a small nod. Nothing theatrical, just procedure. 2 of them moved. Smooth, efficient, no raised voices. They approached the bench, one stepping to Carver's left, the other to his right. For a moment, Carver didn't react. It wasn't until one agent reached for his wrist that the judge instinctively pulled back, not in defiance, but in disbelief. A man so used to presiding over the fall of others could not comprehend his own descent. The agents didn't rush. They didn't need to. Carver's hands were steady, but his eyes darted, first to Jasmine, then to the empty jury box, then to the floor. The cuffs clicked softly. They didn't echo. They didn't have to. Everyone heard them. And in the third pew, Anthony Rhodes, Vietnam veteran, 72, former union organizer, leaned forward just slightly. He had testified in that very courtroom 30 years ago against a developer accused of wage theft. Carver had thrown the case out for lack of relevance. Anthony had never returned until today. Watching the judge who once silenced working men be led out in silence was not a victory. But it was something close to peace. Carver didn't protest. He didn't shout. He didn't look back. As he was walked down the center aisle, the same path every defendant had taken before him, people watched. Not because they enjoyed it, but because they needed to see it. They needed to witness that power, unchecked for so long, could still be held accountable. Jasmine remained still. Her expression didn't change. She had come here for something deeper than satisfaction. Her hands rested lightly on the podium, binder closed, breath steady. She didn't follow Carver's exit with a remark. She turned back to the table, lifted the next folder, and quietly placed it in front of her. The tab read, Councilman Hayes. And without a word, the room knew. The story wasn't over. The judge had fallen, but the architect behind him had yet to face the truth. The folder marked Councilman Hayes wasn't thick. It didn't need to be. Jasmine opened it slowly, revealing a single sheet. No spreadsheets, no recordings. Just a cover page, black type on white paper. At the top, Hayes Operations, internal use only. And below that, a list of code names, initials, property addresses, and handwritten notes in fading blue ink. She didn't explain what it was. She let the words sink in. Then she spoke, calm as ever. This file was recovered from a locked drawer inside Thomas Eldridge's private office. Its contents have been verified by 2 separate federal agencies and matched against campaign finance logs, city contract records, and judicial appointment memos. She lifted the sheet and held it up, not to the room, but to the judge now presiding in Carver's absence. Councilman Hayes is not a bystander. He is the orchestrator. This document names him not as a recipient, but as a planner, the one who approved which neighborhoods were worth flipping, which judges could be leaned on, which developers were guaranteed immunity so long as their checks cleared. The courtroom didn't gasp. The audience didn't shift. What came over the room was something slower, recognition. Like a smell from a place you hadn't visited in years. They had always suspected someone higher up, someone too polished, too untouchable. Hayes had been on every committee, in every photo op. He was the man who visited senior homes during holidays, handed out coats in winter, and promised transparency with every speech. But Jasmine had peeled back the cover, and underneath was not just complicity, but design. In the back, Gloria Freeman sat motionless. 70 years old, retired public librarian, she had volunteered during Hayes's first campaign. Made calls, knocked doors, believed his speeches about equity and reform. Today she felt something colder than betrayal. She felt used, like her voice had been borrowed to build a platform that stood on the backs of the very people it promised to serve. Jasmine didn't linger on emotion. She moved through the file, page by page, showing how zoning decisions from the last 12 years all pointed to the same source. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. Who could live where? Who could afford to stay? Which judges to fast-track? Which community voices to sideline? Then she pulled out the final sheet, a hand-signed letter from Hayes to Eldridge, dated 6 weeks before Carver's appointment. One sentence stood alone. Raymond will cooperate, just keep his campaign clean and his calendar clear. It wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. And as Jasmine folded the papers back into the file and placed it flat on the table, she didn't ask the room to react. She didn't demand an arrest or a reckoning. She simply said, "Power leaves fingerprints. You just have to know where to look." And from the corner of the courtroom, a quiet buzz of movement began. Agents adjusting earpieces, phones lighting up. Jasmine had set the stage. But what came next would depend on whether truth could still move faster than influence. The location wasn't listed in any report. It wasn't even in city records. But Jasmine found it, an underground vault built beneath one of Hayes's private properties, disguised as a utilities access point. With a federal team present, the door was forced open. What lay inside was not just storage. It was intent. Steel cabinets lined the walls, labeled, dated, systematic. These weren't archives of a man hiding his guilt. They were the organized assets of someone who never expected to be caught. Jasmine moved past the first drawers, contracts, campaign logs, donor lists, all damning, but predictable. What stopped her was a drawer labeled Judicial. Inside were profiles, judges both active and retired. Each file contained notes, preferences, debts, family situations. One had a tab marked Receptive. Another read Needs Incentive. The files were coded, but the implications were plain. Hayes hadn't just influenced the courts, he had mapped them. Further back, she found something older, a folder marked Bellwood Heights, the same neighborhood she had exposed earlier. In it, architectural blueprints, early demolition notices, and a list of property owners with a single column beside each name. Projected resistance. Some were marked low, others remove. Not legally, not openly, but effectively, through lease changes, utility shutdowns, or zoning errors that left residents with no recourse. For those watching from afar, it might sound like a political scandal. But for people like Leonard Daniels, 69, a former city engineer who once questioned a last-minute zoning shift and was quietly forced into retirement, it was confirmation. These weren't coincidences. They were orchestrated displacements. Every corner cut wasn't just an efficiency. It was a choice, made to preserve a structure of control. Jasmine paused at one envelope, sealed, unmarked. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper. Typed in bold across the top, "Do not expose unless compromised." Below it, a list of emergency contacts, offshore account numbers, and a document of intent that tied back to Hayes directly. It was, in every sense, a manual for escape. She turned to the agents behind her. No words were exchanged. The air in the vault was heavy, not just with dust, but with consequence. Jasmine reached for a flash drive on the desk, already labeled and time-stamped. Hayes had backed up everything. Maybe as insurance, maybe out of arrogance. Either way, it was now evidence. As she rose, her gloved hand brushed across the steel cabinet door, leaving a faint print, one honest mark in a room built entirely on hidden ones. Outside, the city moved as usual. But in that vault, time had finally stopped for the people who had long moved it in secret. By the time Jasmine's evidence reached the Bureau's hands, Hayes had already moved, not to hide, but to erase. He wasn't in a courthouse or an office. He was at the pier. The kind used for shipping, private and isolated. Just past midnight, under sodium lights and salt air, he stood at the edge of the loading dock with a duffel bag and a small metal canister. It wasn't luggage, it was documentation. Hard drives, old checkbooks, even hand-signed letters, soaked in lighter fluid. One spark and everything would be gone, but the fire never started. Before Hayes could strike the match, he heard it, the low shuffle of boots on old wood, moving in from all directions. Federal agents, not shouting, not pointing guns, just walking in, slow and sure, because they knew he wasn't armed. Hayes looked around once, then again, his eyes scanning the shadows, the water, the sky. Nowhere to run. Not this time. He didn't speak. Not at first. Just stood there, hands twitching, breathing through clenched teeth. It was the kind of silence that only builds in men who've never been stopped. Hayes had lived in headlines. He had shaped city budgets and campaign slogans. He had sat at fundraisers next to governors and bishops. And now, he stood on splintered wood, surrounded, watching everything he built close in around him. When they finally moved to arrest him, he didn't resist. He did something else. He turned his head, scanning past the agents, looking for her. Jasmine, and there she was, standing just beyond the gate, coat buttoned, expression unreadable. She hadn't come for confrontation. She came to witness, not because she needed proof, but because the truth, once uncovered, deserves to be seen through to the end. Hayes's voice cracked when he finally spoke. This won't hold, not as a threat, as a hope, but even he didn't believe it. Across the city, screens lit up with alerts. News anchors scrambled to verify names. Phones rang in quiet homes, where people like Ruth Evans, 75, who had lost her home to one of Hayes's rezoned developments, watched with hands folded tightly in her lap. Not clapping, not smiling, just nodding once with a whisper, "It's about time." As Hayes was led away, floodlights from a patrol boat caught the edge of the pier, casting a long shadow behind him. He didn't look back, because he knew. The game wasn't ending. It had ended. Jasmine didn't stay long. She turned, stepped into the darkness, and left the sound of footsteps behind her. There would be more hearings, more fallout. But for the man who thought he controlled the board, tonight marked checkmate. On a stage he thought he owned, lit only by the consequences he created. There were no press conferences, no speeches, no viral clips of Jasmine standing at a podium. After everything, she chose the back exit of the courthouse, the same one they had walked her through in handcuffs all those years ago. The sidewalk was wet from an early morning drizzle, the kind that makes cities feel quieter than they are. She didn't rush, she didn't pause, she just walked, binder in hand, coat collar up, eyes steady, not avoiding attention, just not needing it. Inside, the city was shifting. Names were coming down from plaques, contracts were frozen, hearings were scheduled. For the first time in years, department heads and judges answered questions without knowing what Jasmine might still be holding. That uncertainty was enough to make them cautious, enough to make them honest, for now. But Jasmine wasn't watching. She wasn't following the news crawl or checking for reactions. Her work wasn't about headlines. It was about weight. The weight of names used to intimidate. The weight of silence held by those too tired to speak again. The weight of evidence gathered piece by piece until finally it tipped the scale. She didn't take satisfaction in Hayes's downfall or Carver's arrest. They weren't trophies. They were symptoms. And symptoms only matter if they lead to something deeper. Jasmine had forced the system to look at itself, not in shame but in full view. That was enough. At a diner just outside the city, Harold Jenkins, 73, former postal worker, stirred his coffee without sugar. He watched the footage in silence. Hayes being walked into federal custody, Jasmine leaving the courthouse, no voiceover, just images. He turned to his granddaughter across the table and said, "They thought she was small." A pause. But she stood in front of all of them. Later that week, Jasmine returned to her office, small, quiet, tucked above a bookstore. On her desk, one file remained, unopened, labeled with a single word, pending. Because stories like this don't end, they shift, they hide, they reappear, and someone, somewhere, will need to be ready. She placed the file in her drawer and turned off the light. Justice, when it's real, doesn't echo, it lingers. Jasmine Crockett's story isn't just about exposing a network of corrupted power. It's a powerful reminder that silence, if prolonged, becomes complicity. In a society where wealth and influence can easily bend the law, what's most needed isn't an angry crowd. It's one steady voice that refuses to be dismissed. Jasmine didn't fight back with rage. She responded with truth. And truth, when spoken at the right moment, can bring down structures that once seemed untouchable. For those who have been overlooked, who felt their voice held no weight, this story proves you don't need power to change what's wrong. You just need to not look away. In life, you may never stand in a courtroom, but every time you speak up for what's right, you're doing what Jasmine did, preserving a measure of conscience for your community. And sometimes all it takes is one person standing tall to make those who thought they couldn't fall finally lose their footing. If Jasmine's story moved you, if it reminded you that quiet courage still matters, hit like to help others find this message. Type 1 if you've ever felt invisible in the face of power. Type 2 if you still believe quiet truth can stand taller than loud corruption. And if you want more stories that speak to justice, dignity, and resilience, subscribe. We're just getting started.